One by one, the myths about mass legal immigration are being shattered. It turns out large-scale migration has not delivered significant growth in GDP per capita and has increased the strain on our capital stock, from roads and GP surgeries to housing. Net migration accounts for around 89% of the 1.34 million increase in England's housing deficit in the last 10 years. Migrants from the Middle East, North Africa and Turkey, aged 25 to 64, are almost twice as likely to be economically inactive as someone born in the UK. This is according to a new report from the Centre for Policy Studies. A signatory of this report is former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, who joined me earlier. In the studio by former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. Robert, thank you very much for joining us today. Has the myth that mass immigration is good for our economy now been shattered?
Well, I hope so, and that's what we set out to do in the report that we published today. The arguments around the social and cultural impact of mass migration are well rehearsed, as is the democratic one, that we have all been voting for 30 years for governments promising to control and reduce migration that only went on to do the opposite. But the last myth to be debunked was that mass migration was an unalloyed good for the economy. And in the report we've set out that that really isn't the case. And in fact, if it had been the case, then 25 years of mass migration would have left the UK an even richer country. And that is not what's happened. In fact, it's had a lot of damaging consequences on productivity, which has flatlined in recent years, on wages, which have been undercut by foreign labour, on the housing market, where the sheer numbers of people coming in have made it much more difficult for people to get on the housing ladder or to rent in big cities like London. And this is really important because winning this argument enables us to take the actions that's actually necessary to cut migration and get back to the kind of historic norms that we want to see.
So are you now trying to make the case that mass immigration of this scale makes us all poorer?
Absolutely. The sheer numbers of people coming in have placed massive pressure on public services like housing, access to GPs and doctors. That costs money to the exchequer. And also the types of people that have been coming in have often been, in fact, invariably been low-wage, low-skilled individuals who do not make a net contribution to the taxpayers here in the UK.
OK, now, you have published a 30-point plan. We won't go into all of them, for obvious reasons. One of these points, I believe, is to split the Home Office into two. Could you explain that for us?
Yes, well, I think the time has come to break up the Home Office. This is an organisation which just isn't working. You can see that day in, day out with stories of failures and incompetence. And I think part of that is the structure and the culture of the Home Office. So what I'm proposing is that we break it in two, that we have a department that handles national security and policing, and then we create an entirely new department for border security and immigration control. And there we try to create and instill a new culture, which is not focused on mopping up the consequences, but is about tackling the root causes of illegal migration, and where we are really focused on having the most robust and fair immigration system in the world.
Can you just emphasise to me then what the culture is like now? I mean, you've just been inside the Home Office. So what's wrong with the culture at the moment?
Well, I'd say there are two issues. One is that it's far too focused on the consequences, the symptoms of the problem, rather than on tackling them and fixing the problem in the first place. And resources are mismatched. Too much money is going on hotels for illegal migrants, too little on stopping the boats in the first place and tackling the issue upstream. And then secondly, the system is far too focused on managing issues like how we support migrants rather than on getting in and having a really robust
so we're too
culture.
Kind at the moment, you think?
Well, I think we all want to see a compassionate and fair system, but we also want to see one that is robust and ultimately puts border security up front. I also just think that this is one of the most important issues for the public. You know, the public routinely say this is the number one or two issue facing the country right now, and therefore it is right that it has its own government department with a minister in cabinet directly accountable for what's going on.
OK, a couple of other points I believe that you want to put across in this report are reducing the numbers of people coming in on health and social care visas and some student visas as well. The argument against that would be, well, who is going to look after us if we're all in care homes, and our universities going to fold?
Well, look, there's trade-offs in whatever you do. But if you want to reduce the number of people coming here, then you've got to tackle some of the big drivers of immigration that we've seen in recent years. One of those is students. And what we're proposing is simply to go back to the position as it was 2 or 3 years ago when students came here, and if they wanted to stay on post-study, they had to get a graduate-level job, which means a job which is paying the right kind of salary. In the last couple of years, what we've seen is a massive proliferation in students coming, paying £5,000 for a short course, often bringing their partner and dependents with them, and that really just being a backdoor to immigration and life in the UK. Some of those people go on to be Deliveroo drivers, you know, a far cry from the kind of graduate-level jobs that it was envisaged.
You must have been saying all of this at the time. When you were Immigration Minister, surely you must have been saying all of this at the time. And a lot of people think now the social contract's been broken, the Tories have left it too late, and Rishi Sunak is not the man for the job anymore. So what was the response when you were saying this stuff?
Well, it wasn't good enough. I mean, that's one of the reasons why ultimately I resigned from Cabinet, because I wasn't able to persuade the Prime Minister and the government to go as far as I wanted to reduce the numbers. We did manage to secure a significant package at the end of last year, which will reduce numbers by about 300,000 a year. But to me, that was a beginning. It wasn't an end point. What I hope we can do now with this set of very comprehensive recommendations is persuade the government to take action. This could be done immediately. The package that we've set out here could be done before the general election.
You sat on this sofa, we were talking about migrant asylum seekers / people with pending visa applications and the crime stats and how difficult it was to get a hold of that. As you know, we've been trying to do our best here at GB News to get some of that information. It's not forthcoming. I believe that you were looking to get a change in the law. I know our viewers and listeners will be keen to know what you're up to with that. Well,
GB News has been fantastic at supporting our campaign. It's Judgment Day coming up next week because the amendment that I have put to the Criminal Justice Bill will come before the House of Commons, and I hope that the government will see sense and will support that amendment, and that would mean that they are then obligated in law to publish on an annual basis those stats. And we can then all see what the impact of migration is on crime and sentencing in this country. And that's just one way in which we can have a more rational and transparent debate about the true consequences of migration.
So that's one to watch for next week then, isn't it? I've got to ask you, Natalie Elphicke, that was a bit of a shock to a lot of people. I also think quite a shock to a lot of people in the Labour Party as well, that the MP for Dover and Deal has decided to switch to Labour, despite saying she will also stand down at the next election anyway. I believe that does make her the first Labour member of the ERG. What do you make of Natalie Elphicke's shock switch to the Labour Party?
I think it's an idiotic decision. She's joined a party which stands for everything that she despises. I can't tell you the number of times I have had conversations with her, and she has attacked the Labour Party for their open doors approach, the fact that Keir Starmer has stood for free movement, has campaigned in the past to prevent foreign national offenders being sent back to their home countries. It's a betrayal, frankly, of the people that she represents in Dover and Deal, who are on the front line of our immigration crisis.
Is it not, however, all of that may well be true, right? But is it also not quite embarrassing for Rishi Sunak? Because he's confronted with this at PMQs, and you've got Natalie Elphicke switching now on, she says, because of broken promises on borders and broken promises on immigration. So whilst you might have gone about things differently, I suppose there is a point of agreement between you and her there. I mean, is it not embarrassing for the Prime Minister to answer this way that we need a general election now?
Well, Natalie's joined a party that will do precisely the opposite of what she's campaigned on throughout her time in Parliament. What I want the Prime Minister to do is something very different, which is to strengthen our borders, not open them up as Keir Starmer would do. I want to ensure that the Rwanda policy actually works. And as you know, I feel that we've opted for a weak version of that. But today, I'm giving the Prime Minister a set of recommendations which would enable him to begin to restore trust in our legal migration system. That template is there for him. I hope that he will use the precious time that we've got now in office before the general election, and that will help to persuade some of those people who, for example, are voting Reform or who are unsure whether to support us, that the party really cares about this central issue.